Welkom bij een nieuwe boost voor jouw missie No More Boring Learning. Dit is de Brain Bakery podcast.
Everybody, thank you for tuning in to No More Boring Learning. We will be doing this one in English without JP because I have a very special guest. And this very special guest today is Julie Dirksen. And if you've ever tried to close the gap between somebody knowing something and actually doing it, you've probably come across her work. And if you haven't, stay tuned. Julie holds a master's degree in instructional systems technology from Indiana University. And she spent more than many years helping organizations design learning that actually changes behavior. She's been recognized for this a lot, but also by the e-learning guild as a guild master. And she's the author of multiple books that I consider essential reading for anyone in our field. Her first book, designed for how people learn, has become an industry classic. The kind of book people recommend to one another whenever they enter our world of learning and development or instructional design. And her latest book, Talk to the Elephant, takes it even further. It's about what happens when people know what to do, but they're still not doing it. Honestly, this is the book I wish I had written. I'm distributing it everywhere. Because it's very, very well written and so insightful. So what I admire most about Julie's work is her ability to translate behavioral change into something practical, warm, and very genuinely useful without dumbing it down or losing the nuance. Julie, welcome to No More Boring Learning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Back in the early 2000s, I worked for Michael Allen, who was the inventor of authorware and is kind of one of our foundational people. And we had T-shirts that had boring e-learning with a big red slash mark through it. So I might still have one somewhere where it's a no boring e-learning awesome. T-shirt. Yep.
So I should wear those as well with boring crossed out or something. Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
Good. So that means that I'm not very original. Thank you.
It's okay. It means you're part of a worthy tradition. That's what it means.
Very well put. Yeah. Thank you so much. And apparently still something we're battling, because if it was there then and it's still there now, we still need to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's such a delight to have you. And I've asked some of our listeners to send us in questions because some of them are familiar with your work. And I want to spread it further around the Netherlands and Flanders, wherever our listeners are. So some of the questions will be by our listeners. Shall I start off the first one?
Great. Yeah, let's go.
Yes. In your first book, Designed for How People Learn, that became an industry classic. When you started then to write Talk to the Elephant, what was the question you couldn't stop thinking about, the one that your first book didn't fully answer?
Yeah, well, there were two chapters in Design for How People Learn where, there's always more to say about everything, but there were two chapters in particular where I felt like we were just starting to scratch the surface. And one of them was chapter 8, which was the motivation chapter.
Yes.
And so that's the take that and expand it all the way out became Talk to the Elephant, Design Learning for Behavior Change. And it was really very much specifically the question that you stated. What do you do when people know what to do, but they still aren't doing it? And what is our role in that as training or learning and development professionals, given that we're not in control of all the variables that govern whether or not somebody does something, but we certainly have influence and we certainly, are part of the conversation, because whenever something goes horribly wrong in an organization, they almost always promise they'll do training. And
yes.
And I think it's good to be realistic about what can we accomplish in training, which I think is a lot. But what we can't also, because those conversations need to be had about what in the system or what in the environment or what in the organizational structure is either promoting the behavior or causing it not to happen.
Oh, yeah. I remember very early in my career, I did this great training of only 2 hours. It was a fantastic session. I had people almost running out of the classroom into the shops to start selling the new product. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks later, nobody sold anything. Well, 0.1 per shop per week. Uh-huh. And I was completely in shock because I thought I'd done it well. Turns out everybody got a bonus for everything but the new product.
Right.
I hadn't even thought about asking the question. Yes. Yeah, that sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. So your work emphasizes identifying the real gap
Mhm.
before jumping into solutions, before going, oh, that should be an e-learning, that should be this. So how do you help designers diagnose the right problem, especially when stakeholders arrive with, we need a training, it should be 3 hours, it should be this. They
Yeah.
already almost mapped out the whole training when they get to you. How do you help designers deal with that?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of questions that I'll usually ask, and one of them just is, why do you think they're not doing it right now? Is it just that they don't have a particular piece of knowledge? And, once in a while, you can find a behavior where the gap is just knowledge. Like if they just knew something, they would do something differently. But that's pretty rare. Like that's usually not all that's going on. So then if you can start to kind of have that conversation of like, well, what do you think are the reasons that people are not doing it right now? And then you can kind of then bring in the, okay, so some of those things that you've identified, I think we can actually absolutely address with training. Here's the ones. What do we want to do about some of these other things that you have,
Mm,
you know, if you're the one telling them what the issue is, that never works as well as if you're asking the questions and they're telling you what the issue is. Because people usually know or have at least, suspicions about it. I always railed against the lazy idea that, the learners are just lazy and that's why they're not finishing the training or that's why they're not doing the thing or whatever. And it's like, I don't actually know very many lazy people. Everybody I
no,
know is so
so
busy they
true.
can't see straight. The two biggest factors that I think are almost always present when we have a challenging behavior change problem, one is just competing priorities, which
Yes,
is our world, right? And so it's
yes.
not enough that you convince people this is important. You have to convince them that it's more important than a whole list of other things that they're also spending their time on. But the other one is delayed or absent feedback. And that one, I have literally never seen a behavior change challenge that didn't have an element of delayed or absent feedback. Something doesn't happen that, there's no feedback in the system that's telling people this isn't right. There is definitely absent feedback in your product example in the sense that there was
Yeah,
no reinforcement of, like if you sold it, nothing good happened.
yes,
Nothing bad happened, but nothing good happened. And so, misaligned incentives, are gonna are frequent cause. And so one of the things about that is even though we've got good instincts about some of these kinds of things, it can be genuinely helpful to like have a more systematic way to figure out what the issues are. And I tried to do that in the book is give lists and ways of
yes.
thinking about it and
So many practical lists.
like
Oh,
a checklist to go through. Is this an issue? Is this an issue? Is this an issue? Because then that really can then help guide what learning experiences are we going to do, but also can we identify places where, yeah, we can do the learning, but if they aren't being incentivized for the behavior, let's be realistic, not much is going to change.
yes. I remember when I was reading your book for the first time, I was working with the contact center and they had just implemented something great, that one question that would resolve a whole lot of shizzle. And they were waiting. They were in the back room looking at the numbers as one does in a contact center because they measure almost everything. And then we replaced the reward to giving people high fives when they just tried the
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah.
And there was a sudden spike.
Yeah.
So it was, it's so true what you say. Those two elements are so crucial and they're now much more in my line of vision. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's an interesting example because one of the things that the book is really based on a model that comes out of University College London Center for Behavior Change, Susan Mickey, and the Behavior Change Wheel and the COMBI model. And so I'm leaning pretty heavily on all of their work, and they've done a tremendous amount of work. Again, also trying to like be comprehensive and really categorize and really think through things. And one of the things that you do as part of the process is that differentiation between outcomes and behaviors, right?
Mm,
So the
yes.
belief is if the people in this contact center will say this thing, it's going to ultimately lead to better outcomes. But
Yes.
that's often a delayed form of feedback. Like that's often kind
Yes.
of down the road. And so the high five, if you just do the behavior, and that's what people have control over. They don't always have control over outcomes, but they have control over behaviors. So
Yes.
if I'm trying to reduce my blood pressure, I can eat less salt, which may or may not reduce my blood pressure. It depends on more than like just that, but we know that that behavior is probably beneficial and useful. And so acknowledging the behavior of eating less salt is probably a more important form of feedback than the outcome of what actually changes in my blood
Measuring
pressure.
it again in 3 months'
Yeah.
time when you've just been stressed because of something else. So there's
Right,
not
right,
even a
right.
difference.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
right. Oh, great example. Let's go to the title of your book because I really love that. So the elephant and rider metaphor is central to the talk to the elephant. Please explain it a little bit. And what's the most common mistake you see when people try to talk to the elephant? And what does it look like when it's done well?
Right. So the elephant rider metaphor comes from somebody named Jonathan Haidt. I sometimes people will talk about it as my metaphor, and I'm like, no, no, no.
I
Um,
almost do that. Sorry.
no, it's okay. But it's Jonathan Haidt, and he wrote a book in oh gosh, the early 2000s sometime, called The Happiness Hypothesis. And he was talking about these two sort of systems that are at play when we're making decisions. And it's an oversimplification. It's one of those all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. And I like this one. And it, it gets talked about in things like Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It's a little bit of a
Yeah.
different version. I happen to like The Elephant Rider, and I think it resonates with people. But it's this idea that we have, if you think about, kind of how your brain is structured, you've got stuff down by your spinal cord that's like a lot of automatic responses. So,
Yes.
like breathing and heart rate and reflexes. And then we have a lot of your brain that's, about physical movement. So, gross motor control, kind of fine motor control. You've got um, things about perception, seeing and hearing and, sensing and perceiving the world. And then you've got things like right in the middle, you've got the limbic system, which does a lot of
Yes.
emotional regulation and fight or flight
Yes.
and things like that. And so a big portion of our brain real estate is taken up with our sense of the physical, visceral, immediate world, right? Like moving around, sensing and perceiving it, moving around in it, interacting with it, things like that. And so that's a lot of what our brain is doing kind of all the time. Um, and then we have areas of the brain like the prefrontal cortex, which tends to engage when we're using executive function and impulse control. And, it might engage when we're planning for the future. And to try to get this into brain regions is a little bit simplistic. It's distributed, but still, we've got parts of our brains that are thinking about like abstract ideas or, planning for the future, which is to a certain extent kind of an abstract idea. So it's our logical, rational, thinking brain that does things like considers future consequences. And then we have a big part of our brain that's like right now, very visceral, very emotional. There, our feeling brain, our emotional brain, and things like that. And when we create a lot of learning experiences, we're almost entirely talking just to the logical, rational, planning for the
Yes.
future part and not, using any communication. So if I'm doing compliance stuff about financial whatever, I'm often talking in abstractions and I'm often, talking about things that are way down the road or may never show up or, things that you can't immediately apply and all of this kind of stuff. And so we're relying entirely on this kind of rider part of the brain that are,
Mm.
our intellectual, executive function brain to kind of be the, that's the only part of the brain that we're really engaging with at that
Yes.
point versus something where we're like, no, the whole rest of this brain is just kind of hanging out here, getting bored while we're
Yeah.
just talking to this part. And so if you really want something to resonate with people, if you really want something to engage, you need to kind of have, a conversation with not just the rider, but you also need to talk to the elephant. so,
Yeah.
and so one of the things with that is immediacy is a big issue, right? The rider plans for the future, but the elephant is like, what's happening right now? And what's
Yes.
happening right now is that these PowerPoint slides are super boring and I really want to take out my phone and check my Instagram feed because I posted a cool thing and I want to see if anybody did anything with it.
Yes.
You know,
How's my TikTok doing?
yeah,
Yes.
right. Or I'm hungry, or I'm bored, or I'm sleepy, or whatever. And so as long as we're like kind of asking the rider to drag the elephant behind them, we're just making this whole process harder. It's just really difficult for people. I sometimes do this thing where I'll be like, okay, how interested are you right now in a 5-minute video on printer repair? And everybody's like 0% interested, you know. Well, but then if I'm like, but now your printer's broken, you need to print something really badly, and now it's your level of interest, and they're like, oh, 100%.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, so what if I put a broken printer in front of you and said, hey, humor me, we're going to do this task, we're going to fix this printer, now where are you? And they're like, 60, 70%, somewhere in there. And I'm like, okay, so none of the video didn't change in any of those scenarios,
No.
right? It's still just a video about printer repair. Hopefully it's a decent one and it's clear and it's easy to understand, but it like doesn't have to have fancy whatever dancing cats and unicorns and I don't know whatever else to be interesting. You just need to have something that you need to do with it, right? Which is this immediate, like, I have a thing I can get my hands
Yeah.
on and
Yeah.
I can engage with, and I have a need. And so a lot of talking to the elephant is just creating that sense of immediacy and something concrete that people can do with information, and not just talking about in the abstract, in the future, maybe sometime, let's speak about this, because then we're really relying on executive function and executive
Yeah.
control to like do all the work, as opposed to when you're talking to both, if you're engaging the elephant, like it's just so much easier for people to pay attention
Yes.
and to engage.
Yes, I found it such a striking image that you conjured in my brain that the next time after I'd really gotten it, I was in front of a group and I was just seeing tiny brains riding on elephants, thinking, whoa, let's
Yeah.
not go there. Whoa, how do I engage the total of it? And it made me actually invent, even though there were many practical things also in the book, invent new ways of engaging both. And I found it so strong.
Mhm.
Do you have any like practical example, except from the printer, where somebody wanted to engage people, the riders, and did that through engaging also the elephant?
Yeah, well, I mean, like compliance training is one of our kind of constant struggles, right? Like if you're dealing with financial compliance or something like that,
Yeah.
you're trying to engage with something that's just not that interesting. It's just
Yes.
not.
Yes,
Um,
I've walked in a back room of a hotel when I was training a hotel, and there was somebody just clicking on a board, and I was saying, you've been doing this now for 2 hours. What are you doing? I'm doing everybody's compliance training
oh my gosh,
because HR makes us. So I
that's
was like, oh
great.
my God, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, no, I collect those stories. That one just got added to the pile of
Oh, good. Yeah,
doing
it's
everybody's
oh, it's
compliance training. That's fantastic because
yeah.
yeah, somebody told me a story. It was for accountants, and they had this required. They had to get 40 hours of training every year to maintain their licensure and their
All
certification.
right.
And so somebody described a story to me of a guy going to the back of the classroom. So he was in a physical classroom. It was an 8-hour day. So he was going to get 8 credit hours from that. And he opened up 2 laptops in the back of the classroom and was going through 2 e-learning at the same time that he was in the classroom. So by the end of the day, he was going to have 24 hours. And I'm like, well, if you make the point just finishing, and that's the only reason that somebody sees to do it, he was totally winning.
Yes.
He was
Yes.
finishing really efficiently,
Yeah.
So
He should be applauded. Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
but
my
I
gosh.
love the like, what are you doing? Oh, just doing everybody's compliance training.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
absolutely
We
going to get
need
added to
we
the
need to
list.
do it by Thursday, otherwise we don't get the reward, or
Yeah.
we don't get, the green dot or something. Yeah,
Right. Well,
yeah.
and if we wanted to sort of just take that, and actually I'm going to do a session on this soon, where we take kind of compliance or technical training and try to figure out how do we flip it and make it more engaging. But if we wanted to do that, the question is, well, these rules exist for a reason. Like they're not completely purposeless. They are associated with bad things that happened at some point,
Yes.
right? Um, so can I put somebody in the situation of dealing with one of these bad things and,
Mm.
identifying the ways that they could have prevented it? Or can I put somebody in the situation of being the compliance auditor who's looking for all the places where the compliance stuff wasn't followed, and
Mm.
now you've got a challenge, you've got a task, it's immediate, I'm trying to find things, I'm trying to do it, but I actually have something I need to use this information for.
Yes.
And like, this is not an insignificant amount of work, this, to build these things, although I'm a little bit of an AI skeptic, but my hope is that it will allow us to build more, interesting scenarios for people to
Yes.
solve, and learning things faster and more easily than we've been able to do
that
so
would
in
be
the
great.
past. If I have to like find the 12 different places where the compliance rules weren't followed, that's at least something that I can get my hands
Yeah,
on. That's at least something the
yeah.
elephant can be like, oh, we
I
have
only
something we're
found
doing right now.
11. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, at least it could be sort of a game, like
Yeah.
how many did you find? At
Yeah.
least that will help.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember working with a mining company in Australia, and safety is a big issue there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had tried like everything to talk to these like guys with muscles and mustaches, and how to get them to talk about safety, because it was almost like safety, if you talk about it, you're like not male enough or something. It was like almost devaluated. And so what we found out at the end is we had everybody bring 3 pictures of the most important people for them to come back out of the mine for, and put those up. And they actually took them down in the mine and hung them up and said, hey, I need to be back there for my wife, my spouse, my children. And that actually helped. And I think that was an example of talking also to the elephant and making it more.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've done some work with like construction site safety things and stuff like that. And, if you think about it, like, okay, this beam is 12 feet off the ground, right? So not that high, but not that high.
Yeah.
I should go and get a harness and put it on to walk across this beam and go, work on that thing on the other side of it. Or I could just walk across it. And your elephant's like, it's probably fine. Like the elephant, likes probabilities, right? Like it's like, oh, most of the time it works out. It's all right. That kind of thing. And, if you think about it and you said, okay, is saving 10 minutes worth not seeing your child graduate from high school?
Oh,
Well, nobody would say, yeah, saving 10 minutes is worth not seeing my child graduate from high school. Nobody would say that.
No.
Right. But that's not the math that's happening. The math is happening is, do I think do I think I will fall off this beam and injure myself? Or having to go to my kid's graduation in a wheelchair, or not being able to continue doing this job, or, any of these kinds of things. And like the risk isn't worth it. And, when I've worked with safety professionals, they're absolutely clear. They're like, it doesn't save time, because when it does happen, it takes so much, time and resources, that like it's doing it the right way saves time in the long run. But like all this little mental accounting is really hard for us as humans to do, but keeping that, so like building the habit of asking the question of, is it worth it not going home safe to my family? No. Okay, I'll go get the harness, that kind of thing.
Let's do it. Let's not think about maybe 10 minutes extra break because I didn't do, think about the important stuff. Wonderful. So you've developed what I call the Dirksen change ladder, with all the reasons they might not be performing a behavior when they know that they know how, and they're still not doing it. So when you diagnose a problem, where do most organizations get stuck on that ladder? What's the most common ones that you see?
Yeah, and that ladder, to do the credits or the the sourcing on it, Robert West and Claire Stevens and some other people were using something similar when they were doing the research that they were doing, was looking at, if we meet people where they are, can we send more effective messaging around things like texting while driving, or alcohol cessation, or smoking cessation, or things like that. And so the ladder, and this is kind of a generalized form of it that I use. So it sort of asks, do people not know about the behavior at all? Right. So maybe it's a new vaccine that I didn't know. I just found out recently that based on my age, I am now eligible to get the pneumonia vaccine in the US.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Well, that didn't used to be the case. It was older, and I think it was, it was about how much vaccine do they have, and, things like that. And so that was news to me. Like, I will absolutely, oh, I can get it, at my age. Sure. Well, then let's go.
Yeah.
And so that was a case where just knowing some information about the behavior changed the behavior. And I'm like, yes, I will get vaccinated. Let's go. So that was purely a knowledge thing. And I didn't know that I could. And once I knew that, I did. So great. Fantastic. But then we get into, I know about the behavior, but it's not I'm not totally convinced, right? So some people don't get vaccinated because they have hesitation about vaccines. And there's a bunch of complicated reasons why that's the case. or I know about the behavior and I genuinely think I should get vaccinated, but like making an appointment and getting it done is a lot of hassle right now. And I'll deal with it. I'm sure I'll be at the doctor's office sometime. I'll deal with it then. Right. So,
Yes.
one is I just didn't know. Two is I know, but I'm not totally persuaded that I should. Three is I'm persuaded that I should, but it's just not a priority for me at this point. And then we start to move into, oh, I would, but I can't figure out where to get vaccinated. I don't know who can do it for me, or I don't know if I can get it covered by my insurance because I live in the US, where health insurance is a whole thing.
Kind of a thing.
Or I'm ready to do it, but like I'm out of state. Like, so it starts to become, I'm totally in on the behavior. I'm totally ready to do it. But now I just need some practical assistance. I need some help. I need somebody to like take my hand and be like, here's how we're going to go and do this, or here's where you can do it, or here's how it can be done. It might be that I feel anxious about it, right? Like it could be that I don't feel, like, oh, I'm nervous about needles, or, to continue. I'm not sure if the vaccine one is going to carry all the way through. I might have to switch my example, but like it might be that, if it was, say, getting started with exercise, right? That's another one, because that's a behavior we want people to do kind of regularly.
Yes.
It may be that I believe that exercise is good. I know I want to do it. I've even made it a priority, but now I'm feeling intimidated, right, by going to the gym.
Because I see all these super muscular people and I'm not one of those. So, oh
Yeah.
my God, let me turn around and walk back.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if it's exercise motivation and it's, you're feeling insecure about it and you need someone to basically take you by the hand and kind of help you, and feel confident and do enough that you're feeling like you're doing something and accomplishing something, but not so much that it's horrible and unpleasant and makes you not want to do it anymore. We don't do a very good job of kind of creating that sort of soft landing for people who are trying to start exercising. We say you need this much time and you need this much intensity and all of those kinds of things. And that may be right, but that shouldn't be like people's very first experience with it.
No, I remember I have a very bad knee, and it took me years to, trust myself to find the right exercise that wouldn't make my knee worse.
Right.
And that was my excuse for a very long time to not move my body at all. Very recognized.
My knees are, I don't have that same exact problem, but like kneeling on anything is quite painful. And so when I finally just admitted that I'm not going to do yoga if you make me kneel on things, I was like, oh, there's a whole world of standing yoga that I can totally do. That's great.
Awesome.
And then we get into things like maintenance, right? I've tried it a little bit, but I'm not kind of building a consistent habit, or I've been doing it kind of consistently, but it's starting to fall off and be a little bit rocky. And those tend to be the areas where we sort of have a little less research and a little less solutions, because it's a harder thing to research on like longitudinal studies and things like that. But we know that as people move through this continuum, what they really need changes completely as they kind of move through. So like the first step, they do need information. I needed to know that I was eligible to get a particular vaccine at my age. Great, perfect, beautiful, supply information. But then as soon as we start to move down a little, it's not about information so much as it is about persuasion or messaging or experiences that help people, kind of feel comfortable, or seeing consequences. And then it kind of moves into actual practical support and assistance. Okay, you're on board. So now we need to help you kind of get over the threshold and get moving with things. And then it moves into things like, how do we maintain, especially when it's a behavior where we want people to do regularly over time, how do we maintain? So it might be about accountability partners, or it might be about tracking mechanisms, or it might be about kind of increased and improved goal setting. It might be about
the body double is like an excellent thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I never knew this, and it works so much. Sometimes I'm hesitating about an email or about reaching out to someone, and just tell one of my colleagues, sit next to me until I do it. Or your phone, but sit next to me, and the body double just does it for me. It's fantastic. Yeah.
No, I love that. Yeah.
So where do most companies or organizations, or maybe even designers like us, get it wrong? Where in the ladder do we often, or do we forget almost every step. How
Yeah, I
you
mean,
have a trend?
the tendency is when people aren't doing something is to add in, sort of add more information in louder and more emphatically.
Yes.
And if that
Yes.
isn't the issue, then that's not what they need. So convincing people that it's super, super, super important isn't going to fix if what they really need is a little bit of practical assistance.
Yes.
And, if,
Sending more PowerPoints, sending more movies, explaining it one more time, putting it on the internet.
yeah,
There's information there. Oh, got it. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, there's a researcher, Gabrielle Odejan, who talks about, her method is kind of whoop. And she looked specifically at the question of whether like picturing yourself being successful was a good motivator. It turns out, it's not great, because that was a big thing for a bit, for a
Yeah.
minute, where it was like you're supposed
Yeah.
to picture yourself being amazing and
Yeah.
successful. It turns out that it's not super helpful. What works much better is kind of going, let me think through all the things that might stop me from doing this and
Yeah.
create plans for those. So
Yes.
that
What if this
kind of action
happened?
planning piece, right?
Yes, the action planning is very powerful. I heard they did that with the elections in Georgia, where
Mm,
they action plan. What if it's raining on the day off? What if
yes.
your car breaks down? To work around all of those. Those are much more powerful. Wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even just what time are you going to go vote? And,
Yes.
do you know where you're going to go vote? Let's get that.
Yes.
Let's make sure you know where you're going to go vote and decide what time. Okay, you're going to go over lunch. Great. What if it's busy because everybody else is going over lunch? Then, yeah, you get into the action
Yeah.
planning piece and things
Yeah.
like that.
Good. But also, I've heard, and you write about that in the book too, we need to stop blaming learners. And I think when I first read it, I was like, I'm never blaming learners. They're
Oh,
intelligent, they want to learn. But the more I thought about it, sometimes, we're on the phone at the end of a training session with another trainer who finished another trainer session. And they weren't really into it, or they
yeah.
weren't prepared, or management didn't do this, or they're not that dedicated to the company, or we're blaming learners for not learning. How do you redirect that conversation without immediately making enemies?
Right, right. Well, there's a quote that I'm kind of obsessed with, which is, it's probably Edward Deming, but attribution's a little murky, but the quote is, every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets.
Yes.
And so if you've got a room full of people who are not engaged and on board, then what about the system is designed to create them not being
Yes.
engaged and not being on board?
Yes.
And can you
Yes.
have that conversation with them? And like sometimes it's just that it hasn't connected for them. You can't connect it to things that they care about, right? And there's some
Yeah.
things that are just never going to be that inspiring. Like one of the examples I use is people filling out their timesheets. Well, you're never going to have people passionate about filling out their timesheets. Like,
Woohoo! No.
it's just not going to be, it's just
No.
not going to be something people are like,
No.
yay, I get to fill out my timesheet. But, like it feels like dumb paperwork that's a distraction from other things. And so, can you connect it to real things? Like, here's how this is how it makes the accounting person's life difficult when you don't fill out your timesheet. Like, this is all the hassle she has to go through every single week because you're not filling out your timesheet. Well, most people aren't jerks, and most people don't want to
No.
make their coworkers' lives difficult, but that's usually invisible to them, that's the
Yes.
outcome of it. And obviously a timesheet's connected to the role of the organization and, the viability and ultimately you having a job and all sorts of really important things. But a lot of those connections are really not visible and not clear. And honestly, when something's always going to be a tedious, unpleasant task like filling out timesheets, it's never going to be fun.
Yeah.
But it's always worth, when you're looking at it from the systems approach, how do I make this as easy as possible for this person
Mm.
to do? Right.
Yeah.
And maybe we all body double, like we all jump in on Monday at 8:15 for a 10-minute Zoom call where we all just do our timesheets together. And then we all go, woo, yay, or high
Yeah.
five or whatever it is. Right.
Yes.
Um, so like, can I figure out ways to make this behavior, like, and when we look at it, there's many different motivation models. I like self-determination theory. I think it has lots of useful things to say, but
Mhm.
I would never claim that it's, the only or the even necessarily the most important model. But one of the things they talk about is connectedness. So if we're all
Yes.
doing our timesheets together at the same time, and then we do a high five at the end of it, like that's a value that's a motivator of that kind of
Mm.
feeling of connectedness. And we're all doing a thing. And it's, and our elephants are all like, hey, we're hanging out with the people and we're doing a thing.
Yeah.
And so the leaning on, you'll get punished if you don't do your timesheet, or you'll get yelled at, or, whatever. Well, if those things were super effective motivators, they probably would have worked by now. So let's maybe try something
Yes.
different.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. I always try to ask myself the question, if they're not doing it, what has to be like the issue for me to also not want to do it?
Yeah.
And how can we resolve for that?
Yeah,
Wonderful.
absolutely.
Wonderful. Yeah. Yeah. Let's go AI. You already said a little bit about that. So in a
Sure.
world flooded with AI tools, and I had recently had a conversation with Dr. Clark Quinn,
Mm.
and he even said we are in an AI bubble. So he was even warning for it to pop. But in a world of AI tools and instant content generation, how should designers avoid adding more noise and instead use these technologies to support real learners' outcomes?
Yeah.
Do
Well,
you have any
the AI thing
wisdom on
is so interesting to me from a behavioral point of view, because one of the really crucial things that anybody, specifically talking to large language model AI, because there's different kinds, but if we specifically talk to large language model AI, one of the things that everybody agrees on is super crucial is for people to diligently check the output of the AI and make sure that it's right.
Yes.
And so then we start to look at something like COM-B, which is are they capable? Do they have the opportunity? Are they motivated? And when we look at capability, that's an interesting thing, because most people using AI right now are people who already know how to do their jobs. And so they're using the AI to do it faster or easier. And they are capable of judging the outputs. But that's
Yes.
going to, that's going to change. Like, new people come into jobs, and if AI is built into the workflow, they may or
Yeah.
may not have the opportunity to kind of learn some of the things they need in order to be able to do that. So that's something that we need to look at. Opportunity is kind of about, does the physical environment afford things and stuff like that. And we would look at the question of, if we want people to judge the outputs, does the environment make it easy for them to judge the outputs, or make them easy to revise, or things like that. And it's AI is interesting in that respect, because when I'm using a chat GPT or something like that to try to do something, if I want to change it, because it's not quite right, and I change it, then I get something that has changed more than I wanted it to necessarily.
Yes.
So there's things about the environment that make that its
Yeah.
own set of challenges. But then the motivation piece, we know defaults are a very powerful strategy in behavioral design, because people tend to accept defaults.
Yes.
And this has been used quite a bit. There's a lot of fairly famous research around organ donation, and people are much more likely to list themselves as organ donors on, in the US, it's driver's licenses. I'm not sure what it is other places, but they're much more likely to list themselves organ donors if it's already checked when they get there. They're like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I guess I'll leave it. And so we know the
We have that in our
defaults.
country. In our country, you are a donor unless you object to it
Right.
and remove yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. Yeah.
And so that is, and I mean, it's all a more complicated system than that, but nonetheless, like, people were more likely to do it if the default is that it's selected, if you're designated, unless you opt out. And all of, people are being presented with a lot of defaults, sort of good looking, kind of sort of right answers by the AI. And the idea that they're going to diligently check it and make sure it's completely 100% right before passing it on is not historically verifiable in human behavior. That's not how we
Let
usually
me do a
roll.
confession here. I recently got flooded with emails of questions about doing a keynote. I'd done a very famous keynote, and there were lots of questions coming in. And somebody had asked, can you do this date? And I couldn't do the date. So with everybody that I could do the date, I wrote a personal email, and I had 6 or 7 that I had to say no to because the date didn't match. I put those in ChatGPT.
Mm.
And one of them, the last one, when I was completely tired, I was like, all right, got that one, just plugged it into the email, in which I offered to think with them on the topics they could do and even help them find another person. And I sent it out.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
was so ashamed. And I
Yeah.
actually, confessed. But
Yeah.
it was terrible. It was terrible because that's the default. That's just, all right, it's done. Bloops. Let's send it out.
And it had
so
done like 5 that were fine. And then like the 6th one, you were like,
the
oh,
sixth
it's got to
one.
also be fine because that's
Yeah.
how.
And I sent them a link to plan an appointment with me. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing the appointment and really helping them because I promised, but that was ChatGPT's fault or my default brain fault. Yeah.
Well, like
Yeah.
that is just not something that we're really spectacular at as humans,
No.
is double checking defaults. There's a reason why copy editors are a very specialized profession, and you need a very
Yes.
particular kind of set of skills and,
Yeah.
almost a set of, capabilities to be good at copy editing materials. I'm writing a new book right now, and I very much know I'm going to like leave the verb out of certain sentences, and that, it's going to require a
Somebody
couple
will
of
come
pairs
in
of
with a
eyes
red
to,
crayon and go,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
we
Like,
need
and then
them.
I can't copy edit my own writing because I know what it's supposed to say. And so
Yeah.
I just read it like I expect to, in the same way that like accepted the email and the what, is what you expected it to say. And
Yeah.
then didn't realize until afterwards it was like, oh, that one was different.
Well,
So
yes. Tell me a little bit more about your new book. I can't wait. When is it coming? What is it about?
yeah. So the other chapter in Design for How People Learn that I was like, oh, we're just getting started, was the chapter on skills development. And that's an interesting thing right now with the AI, because
Yes.
there's the whole issue of, are we just going to use AI? Do people really still need to develop skills? I think yes. So I'm gonna,
I agree.
but one of the things we see all too often is kind of insufficient practice, and so being more realistic about like what level of practice something's going to take. We seem to understand it when it's like a hands-on skill. So we know that nobody's going to be able to play volleyball without practicing, and you don't want a
Yeah.
doctor, performing surgery who hasn't practiced, and you don't want a pilot who hasn't practiced. But then
Yes.
we go over to something like managerial or leadership training, and we're like, well, we'll just tell them stuff and they'll do one role play and then they go off and they do it. And it's like, well, actually, this stuff's really hard and it needs a lot of
Yes.
practice.
And then some people still call that a soft skill, when it's a very hard skill. Yeah, true. Yeah.
And so it's really about like, what are the different things that when you're being presented with a skill that you're going to create a learning experience for, really sort of being able to break it down and kind of go, what should practice? How would I teach this skill, and what should practice look like for something like
Yes.
this?
Oh, that's wonderful. How long do we still have to wait?
Well, if I can stick to my schedule, it should be out in the fall sometime. So,
All right. Oh, looking
my
forward
publisher's
already.
pretty quick. That's actually a pretty fast turnaround time
That's awesome.
in the industry.
Awesome. Good. Oh, good. Can't wait. Do you have a title yet?
Design for How People Build Skills is the current
Design
title.
for
We'll
How
see if
People
it
Build
sticks.
Skills. Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
we tweak, but that's the current
You've
version
heard
of
it
it.
first here. You've heard it here. Yeah.
Yeah, this
Very
may be
good.
the first time I've told anybody publicly the title. So yeah.
So let me go to the last question to wrap it all up. If somebody listening right now could only do one thing tomorrow, they're, struggling with the design or training something, and they could shift their practice towards actual behavior change. And what would that one thing be? What would you, if you had a magic wand and you could touch all the designers all around the world, what would you give them or impart knowledge in them, in their brain, or talk to their rider or the elephant or both for them to do differently?
Yeah. So I'm going to say 2, because I'm going to cheat.
Okay, please. Thank
One
you.
is to really ask that question of, what's everything that's in the system right now that's causing the behavior to either happen or not happen? And how many of these things can I impact with training? So that's one question. And then the other question is, what are the feedback mechanisms, and how can we improve it how can we improve the feedback that people are getting on the behavior? So
Yes. All right. Let me just thank you. And I might actually read the book in the fall and ask you back to talk about your
Okay.
next book.
Yeah.
But I'll pop online for that. Can I thank you so much, everybody? Please give it up for Julie Dirksen. That's awesome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. This has been such a fun conversation. So thanks for having me.
No more boring learning. Dit was de Brain Bakery podcast. Wil je meer weten? Kijk dan op brainbakery.com of volg ons op onze socials.